LD Comics is a women-led welcoming to all forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sarah Lightman and Nicola Streeton as Ladies Do Comics, today LD Comics is run by a committee of 6 published graphic novelists: Charlotte Bailey, Rachel Ball, Emma Burleigh, Lou Crosby, Wallis Eates and Nicola Streeton. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
Kia ora, I'm talking from Aotearoa, New Zealand, so here it's morning, so I just woke up, but I'm going to try to do this anyway. And before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm giving this talk on stolen and colonized land of the Maori people, who I stand in solidarity with, and I want to show my support for Tino Rangatiratanga. So I'm going to talk a bit about my graphic memoir palimpsest and the challenges opposed to working on it. And I'll also briefly talk a little bit about my next book that I'm currently working on. So yeah, this is the cover for the English edition, and here are the covers for some of the translations and also the original Swedish version, which is right to the right here. So in 2016, when this came out, I dedicated my graphic memoir palimpsest to all adoptees, living or dead, whose voices have been silenced. Oh yeah, it looks like this. And my book was reviewed in one of Sweden's major daily newspapers, and the reviewer, who also happened to be an adoptive parent, while posing as sympathetic towards my struggles as an adoptee, she also questioned this dedication. She didn't know who these silenced adoptees were, or who they could possibly be, and emphasized this rhetorical ignorance by putting the word silenced within quotation marks. And what she probably didn't intend by asking this is that she managed to pinpoint the very exact reason why I felt the need to draw and write palimpsest in the first place. I always get asked what palimpsest means, so I'm going to explain that. It's a manuscript on which the original text has been erased and then overwritten by another. And within the world of adoption, I think that a word can be used as a metaphor to illustrate how the life of an adoptee is treated as if it began with the adoption, and rendering previous events and genealogy and our roots irrelevant or of lesser importance. And adoptive parents are still the loudest and most prominent voices in the adoption world. And it's their stories and their research, their opinions, thoughts and feelings that are still considered the most important. And the voices are also seen as subjective and clear-headed and trustworthy, even when they speak for us adoptees. And this is why I found it particularly hard to learn that my own story was a palimpsest indeed, in fact, and in a quite literal sense, which I'm going to show you here. This is from the album, and to the left you can see one of my documents, and then to the right you can see the official documents that was used to approve of my adoption. And in one, you can see the name of my parents, although fake here, to protect their names. And in the official document, they have been erased. So when I started searching for my Korean parents, I found out that my parents' name had been erased from my document papers, and that they had been, all my information had been replaced by false and manipulated ones. And I had been labeled an orphan, even though I had 2 living parents. And everything I'd been taught about adoption was turned upside down. So when I started seeking out other adoptees to see if there were other stories like mine, I realized that there are so many of us, and a lot of us felt betrayed of all the things that we had learned via these adoptive parent-centered stories. And I'm going to read a bit about, from my book that deals a little bit with this. So I'm not going to read everything because it's going to take too long, but and I will probably skip most of the speech bubbles. So here goes. It's no wonder we adoptees forget that we were ever born. We're taught that our existence began the day we met our new families. The word that describes how we became a part of our families hides the fact that we ever belonged to another one. And this is the original story I grew up with. It was put up on my parents' fridge as a poem. Not flesh of my flesh, nor bone of my bone, but still miraculously my own. Never forget for a single minute, you didn't grow under my heart, but in it. So many of us actually believe that our lives started with a flight. Our first families are eventually reduced to the margins to be completely erased in the end. Many adoptees feel an inexplicable grief on their birthdays. They somehow remind us of loss that no one will talk about. We mourn in silence. We don't want to risk upsetting or hurting our adoptive parents, so when our losses are talked about as a positive, we keep quiet. We become an empty vessel for other people to fill with their own story. And eventually, we start retelling those myths we've been fed ourselves. And after a while, our first families disappear completely from our own stories, and so do we. Over the years, the story has worn a hole in my soul. During the pushing stage at the birth of my first child, it seemed that my body was possessed by my mother. She was me, and I was the child on my way out into the world. It is recommended that you use visualization techniques to help you through the demanding labor. Each contraction, however painful, brings you closer to your baby. But what do you do when the contractions are pulling you away from it, and the baby inside is going to be given to someone else? I was taken from my mother as a newborn. Was she even allowed to hold me? An image of that separation has been stored in my body for all those years, and now it throws me into total darkness. Night after night, I watched over my newborn son, ready to pick him up if he woke up feeling lonely. Each cry tore me apart. I thought he sounded like an abandoned child. I was tormented by nightmare visions in which I die and Teddy is taken away to an orphanage, to later be adopted and taught to forget that I was ever his mother. I thought about the little child I once was, who lived in Korea, who was Ullum, who was Korean, who spoke Korean, who may have been abandoned but was still part of something bigger, who was put on a plane with a one-way ticket to Sweden, accompanied by an escort who didn't look like anyone she'd ever seen before. Who landed in a foreign land where she was handed over to complete strangers, where there were no familiar tastes or smells, where she couldn't comprehend a word anybody said, where nobody understood her, and where Chung Ullum ended and someone called Lisa began. Drawing palimpsests turned out to be quite a challenge in many aspects, and not only did I have serious doubt about my drawing skills, I had never drawn anything longer than a few pages up until then, and I had never been good at drawing people. And before palimpsest, I had mainly been drawing children's comics and cute bunnies. So with palimpsest, another layer of my adoption became very clear to me. People like to joke about how comic artists ultimately always draw, if not themselves, at least versions of themselves. And with me, that couldn't be further from the truth. I had no idea how to draw Asian people at all, and definitely not myself. And as a transracial adoptee, I had grown up in a white family with white friends and in a largely white community. And Swedes tend to believe that Sweden is post-race, colorblind society, and non-white adoptees are quite often talked in terms of like being almost white. Or with me, people used to say like, I don't even see you as Asian. So navigating race and talking about race in terms that aren't perceived as racist is virtually impossible in Sweden. So growing up, I drew pictures of mainly white people, and most of the representation I saw of people who looked like me looked like this. We were usually packaged in yellow face or as racist stereotypes with buck teeth, squinting eyes, wearing rice hats and having yellow skin. Or as females, we were hypersexualized prostitutes or mail order brides. So as an artist, I think this was complicated enough to deal with, but on a personal level, I realized how incredibly damaging this had been to me. So drawing palimpsest became almost therapeutic in that sense. And I had to teach myself how to create my own positive or neutral representation of people who look like me. But it was very deliberating because I could choose how to draw myself and Asians, and I could narrate us as real human beings instead of racist stereotypes. And by doing this, I finally actually stopped internalizing the racism that I had grown up with. And another challenge was to deal with hate, which came as a big surprise to me. Because not until I started voicing my concerns about adoption and the findings I had done during my search did I realize that talking about corruption in adoption is actually not something that people welcome. Instead of being met with shock and horror that there are illegal and corrupt adoptions, people told me that the problem was me. I was sick and I was hateful and I was bitter, and probably I also hated my adopted parents and anyone else who couldn't have their own children. And I was an awful person who should just be grateful that my adopted parents and Sweden as a country had taken me in and saved me from all sorts of horrors that would have happened to me in Korea. And surprise to me was that very often this hatred was expressed by adopted parents. And they told me that my criticism was actually hurting their kids. In my innocence, I had been convinced that they would be the first one to join me in my fight. But no, I was supposed to be silent, unless I had anything positive to say. Today, I'm quite used to the hatred and all the angry emails that I get. It comes with the territory. But it haven't stopped me, and I'm going to continue my fight. And I continue my fight partly on Instagram, where I regularly post drawings and texts about adoptee-centered issues. And I'm also working on my next comic book, which will be published next year in Swedish first, but I'm hoping to get it translated as well. And this time I will also include the voices of first mothers who have lost their children to adoption. At the moment, there's an extensive crime investigation going on in Chile, where they are looking into thousands of cases where children were illegally obtained by a network of social workers, midwives, doctors, judges, orphanages, and adoption agencies during the Pinochet era and the years after. And one of the adoptees that I will, the story I will follow, he was separated from his mother at birth, and his mother was told that he was stillborn. But in fact, he was kidnapped by the hospital staff and then sold to Sweden for adoption. And as sensational that it might sound, his case is actually not an isolated one. And sadly, it's also not restricted to Chile alone. We hear these stories from all over the world in many sending countries. So thousands of mothers bear witness to having lost their children to adoption through coercion, deceit, force, bribery, and kidnapping. And one would expect that the adoption world would react with disgust and anger in regards to these crimes. But unfortunately, the mothers are treated very similar to adoptees who are voicing these concerns. So we are told now that the mothers are lying and that their memories are false and that they have forgotten what actually happened. And it's actually their guilt that is making them lie, because they don't want to admit that they abandoned their children. So because of this, I've decided to dedicate my next book to mothers of loss. And yeah, like with my own story, I expect to be questioned about who these silenced mothers could possibly be. So this is my dedication to them. Yeah, and that's that's my little presentation. And I have created this little page if anyone wants to look me up, and feel free to contact me with any questions or anything. And yeah, follow me on Instagram if you want to see what I'm working on, what I'm angry at the moment or concerned with.
I'd like to talk to you about my new book, Shame Pudding, but to do so I want to go right back to the beginning, when I was a funny little 5-year-old keeping diaries which were 10% about me and my family and 90% about the A-team. And I think I must have drawn this in about 1982, so I can't quite remember what's going on, but B.A. Baracus is thinking, he's wondering how long it will take by train to get to the Metin place. It must be long for him, poor little kid. And the poor little kid has got his box of toys. B.A. Baracus has got his carefully labelled box of guns, his lovely jewellery. So yeah, I did a bunch of these, and I grew up, went to art school, got a lot more self-centred, and my diaries became more about me, less about Mr. T. And here's one of them. One of the worst things that has ever happened, dropping a whole chicken chow mein in the road whilst running home in order not to miss the Elvis impersonator at my local pub. And if you look carefully, you can see me in the back dropping my noodles on the pavement whilst everybody else is enjoying fake Elvis. So yeah, I did a bunch more of these, and I made them into photocopied books, which I sold at comic shops and record shops. And then I discovered comic fairs. Met a whole bunch of lovely people, including some of you here today. Everyone was very nice and supportive and generous, and I discovered everything a comic could be, well, some of what a comic could be, and what a wonderful way of storytelling it is. So I began using panel, a bit more traditional, well, as traditional as I'd ever get, panel work, and did some autobiographical comic strips that I called Monday Mornings, which accounts for my silly Instagram name. So some of these were quite straightforward chunks of life. Here I am with writer's block, 11 a.m, nothing happens, 3:15, nothing, 6:15, nothing. Finally at 9:45, I go to the toilet, 2 a.m, meltdown, and then finally at 5:15, inspiration strikes, just in time for my alarm to go off and to go to the day job. So some are quite straightforward, others were a bit more surreal. Here I am having a chat with my friend about that she thinks I can't draw her, but as she's describing what she thinks she looks like, she's turning into this image, so she thinks that she's squarer than I drew her. She looks more like Nick Nolte, and she has smarmy hair, whatever that might be. And that's one of the things that I like best about comics, is that you can dip in and out of reality and fantasy without too much fuss. And in one of these comics, my TV broke, and when it fixed, the first thing that came on TV was the Ken Russell film Women in Love. If you haven't seen it, you should, but you should also know it has a very famous naked wrestling scene in it, with Oliver Reed and Alan Bates. Here they are having a wrestle, and I was so impressed with their naked wrestling and their chemistry that they began making guest appearances in my Monday morning autobiographical strips, and they soon became much more popular than I was, so I had to give them a strip of their own, which was called, as Emma beautifully pronounced, Was It Too Much For You, which is what naked Oliver Reed says to naked Alan Bates as they're lying on the rug post-wrestle. And yeah, so here's one of them, a topical festive one. Oliver Reed has found a bargain. He's saying, Alan, look at this lovely tree I got for £30. And Alan Bates is reading his Sharks Quarterly magazine. Robert Oliver Reed, it was Christmas 3 weeks ago. Whatever shall we do with it? 3 weeks ago, you say? Oh, don't remember that at all. Because they're a pair of terrible drunks and they cause havoc wherever they go. Here they are causing havoc in the ice cream parlour. Another thing I love doing with comics is leaving out a bit of dialogue or a bit of action, so people have to fill it in to get the joke or to tell the story. And also I did this one because I just think it's the best way a human can dress for comedic purposes and somehow looks more naked than being fully naked. I also really like the constraint of working to a specific amount of panels. In this case, it was mostly three panels. So you've got to be inventive in ways of telling a joke or story, edit. But sometimes these two being what they were, they would break out of the panels altogether, fly across the page. Here Oliver Reed's had too much coffee. Yeah, so it was this collection of strips that recently won the Comedy Women in Print Award. And this was an award set up by the comedian Helen Lederer to celebrate funny women in print. And thanks to the very hard work of Ladies Do Comics, this year they had a graphic novel category, so I was able to enter and joint win with the legendary Posy Simmons. And so, yeah, I'd just like to publicly say thank you very much to everyone at Ladies Do Comics and to our comics laureate, Hannah Berry, for everything you do, finding new audiences for comics and spreading the good word. And from a more personal point of view, thank you for my first win since my 1989 Conquer Championship at school. And for giving me an excuse to dress up in my acceptance speech as Oliver Reed, which nobody actually realised it was me. And I had to make my poor mother tape on naked Alan Bates with a balloon for a head to my left hand. So this was this year. But going back to 2016, I was in my caravan, hibernating, and I'd hurt my back. So I was off work, I was heavily medicated, and I began drawing again picture diaries sort of as a form of therapy. It's weird to feel on the edge of fainting, but not in a bad way. If I fell in the road and a bus drove over my head, maybe I wouldn't even notice. My arachnophobia is not strong enough today to make me lift my arm and flick away this spider. Besides, perhaps it's a Charlotte. That Charlotte of Charlotte's Web fame, the best spider in literary fiction. So yeah, I was doing this and posting them online, and they were getting quite a good reaction. But I was struggling with my new bleak honesty. So here I am having a row with myself. Monday morning, Danny is fighting Diazepam Danny. Oi, what's all this? Where's the punchlines? Diazepam Danny's just passed out. Oi, why is it so serious? I'm not drawing to entertain anyone. I'm drawing to stop myself from going mad. Pfft, always entertain. Why are you so scared of honesty? Why do you always need to joke? I'm not scared. I just hate the "you okay, hun" business. Besides, if you are in fact drawing for yourself, how come you did redraws? What? Redraws? I seen them. But I'm in pain. I'm sad. So am I, sister. No excuse not to be entertaining. And then there's a third little me at the bottom, gleefully watching. Cool, that was just like the fight between Superman and Evil Superman in Superman 3. I wonder which one I am. So yeah, I was doing this. My back got better. I carried on doing small little projects, Oliver Reed's Monday mornings. But I'd always wanted to do something more longer form. And though I love self-publishing, the freedom it can give you, I realised I wouldn't settle down to a bigger project unless I tricked somebody into giving me a deadline. So I wrote on my website that I was working on a graphic novel in the hope someone might ask me about it and I'd have to do it. And here I am in my bed with buckets of caffeine, white lights, blue lights, wondering why I can't sleep, wondering why my back's bad. When I got an email from a woman in Brooklyn, Liz Francis, asking me what I was working on. She had seen my work in an amazing anthology called The Strumpet, and here's a page from that. The theme was origin stories, and this was sort of the story I'm telling you now about how I came to comics through being an obsessive diary keeper. So Liz had set up this publisher, Street Noise Books, as a reaction to the horrific election of Donald Trump, and she was gathering some amazing people doing non-fiction comics and was very eager to work together. I sent her some roughs I'd been working on, Poisons and Painkillers, which was sort of a chronicle of various different illnesses and ailments I'd had and different ways I'd medicated. But as you can probably tell from this presentation, I sort of jump all over the place, not very linear, and she wasn't quite sure what to do with me. So she sent me an email whilst I was travelling from work. Here I am, crushing them with the zombies. And she said that from what she'd read, the thing that had jumped out at her most was a little bit with me and my grandma. And would I be interested in focusing more on that? And as soon as I read that, it lit a fire in my belly. And I immediately replied with 7 different anecdotes. Said, if you like that, Grandma, you're going to love my other one. And explained how she used to pinch my cheeks and scream, shame pudding, in my face, which is her mangled way of speaking Yiddish. Shane pudding means beautiful face. But me and my brother thought it was this horrific insult, mostly because of her delivery being very aggressive affection. So yeah, I got so involved in all these stories that I completely missed my train stop, was late for work, but Shame Pudding was born. And here's some pages from the finished book. So yeah, when I read things or watch things, I don't like being over explained to, so I wanted to dive straight into the action, show what it's like being part of a loud, busy Jewish family, everybody sitting around the dinner table, interrupting each other, telling jokes that sounded like stories, anecdotes, everyone interrupting with their own twists and turns. And here's me and my little brother crawling out from under the table, shushing each other, off doing some important business. Dad's mum we called Grandma Min. Just a small one for me, please, darling. And Mum's mum was simply Ma. And for me too, Cookie. But over time in our little Brighton household, they became the Mars, the double-headed force of nature. Thank you, darling. Bloody hell, not that small. Ma liked her drink. And here we are at a typical Jewish atheist Christmas. My mum, who's an incredible cook, can't put food on the table without apologising for it. And my dad's here teasing her about it. And me and my little brother passed out on a dinner table. Ma's saying, are they ill? No, Mum, they just woke up at 3 a.m. 3 a.m? You'll get a punch on the nose. She loved to threaten to punch us on the nose, though she never did. And I wanted to show this warm, silly, fun family in contrast with what was going on in my head. Am I all right for time, by the way? Yeah, no? I can't hear you, so I'll carry on. Okay, lovely. So yeah, I was having these weird sleep paralysis and insomnia and nightmares, and I got very fixated on memory and perception. I didn't know how I could know that I was seeing what other people were seeing, which is weird for a kid to be wandering about, but my mum was very good at stopping me worry about all this, and my whole family was like a lovely warm security blanket that helped me be brave, go out into the world with my anxious heart as a very awkward teenager, and get involved in politics and protests, go to art school, and by some miracle join a band. And here I am, glamorous life on the road with an unsuccessful band where we'd all made ourselves ill from drinking out of date beer. The bass player wanting to stop every 5 minutes for food or a piss, all the way from Brighton to Glasgow, ending up in magical mosh pits and having a brilliant old time. But the heart of the story is my two grandmas. I'd watch them Miles on Our Sofa every Friday night and wish for a time machine so I could go back and spy on what mischief they got up to when they were young. Because it turns out they were just as mischievous as Naked Oliver Reed and Naked Alan Bates. And that's it. That's Shane Pudding in the shops now for all your atheist Jewish Christmas needs.
So as Emma said in the introduction, in 2017, me and Victoria found ourselves in this really unusual position. Basically, Wings was born with a destruction. It's an act of destruction. That's why I've got the bin there on the slide. I found myself in the very classroom that we'd been teaching in. We'd spent several months working with men at Wandsworth Prison, helping them to create digital stories using iPads about experiences that they wanted to share. It could be anything they wanted to talk about. So it was a really bonding and profound experience, and we really connected with these men. And as had happened before, we'd always take the films out of the prison and we put the films onto our website that we worked for, a charity at the time. But in this particular instance, the security said to us that we couldn't take the films out. And there were quite a few reasons why we couldn't, but the one that was most strange was they felt that if the press got hold of one of the films, they might use technology to zoom into the sound and in the background find out all sorts of secrets. On the flip side, there's a sense, we have to be respectful of the victims and of their crimes. And we felt that with every film that had been made, it was very respectful, and that there was nothing that would harm anybody. So it was an unusual situation to be in, and I had to literally press the delete button and get rid of all these films that we'd spent months and months making. So we're going to the next slide. Yeah, so it wasn't as if we didn't have experience doing this work before. We worked for the charity Stretch. Vicky was the chair of the board of trustees. I'd delivered this program many times, and as you can see down there, we've got 310 videos online already. So it was unusual to be doing this. Next slide, please. So was all this work going to go down the drain, or was there some hope? Next slide, please. The answer to that was yes, there was some hope. There was some light at the end of the tunnel. When I went in to destroy the films, we had actually been given permission that I could transcribe them. So I was allowed to write down all the scripts from the films that the men had made. So now we had the words existed. There was something we could do with this work. It wasn't going to go down the drain after all. So Wings, so with that, there was a glimmer of a new beginning. Next slide, please. So you become Wings. So it was a book that Vicky would write, that I would illustrate, and it would also include the men's stories that I'd had to just destroy. So it was going to carry on. And I just put these two slides together as well to show how the visual journey progressed as well, from being this very kind of linear drawing. Towards the end I was drawing much more textured with lights and darks, so I'll talk a little bit about that later on. So now on to Vicky's section.
Okay, so this slide here, obviously these are Wallis's drawings. This is a picture of me with one of the conditions of us doing anything with these stories was that we weren't allowed to name or identify the prisoners in any way. And we went through all sorts of ideas. We were going to call them different names. Oh, let's call them Bob, or let's call them David, you know, but ultimately it came down to we just gave them numbers, and which it seems really dehumanizing, but that actually is how it is. So this then, I won't name him by name, but this was prisoner 6, and I worked with him one of the first days that we really sat down with the men, and there were all sorts of shenanigans about actually finding groups of men to work with. I mean, it was really just a bonker. The whole situation was just bonkers from start to finish, which is in the book. I sat down with him one afternoon, and he was kind of sitting there. We were working actually in a porter cabin. We worked in a few different places in the prison, but on this, quite often, we were in a porter cabin in the middle of the prison yard, which is a really surreal experience. So we were all sitting there in our little sort of fuzzy grey porter cabin while random, you know, men were wandering around the yard around us, and there's all sorts of it's just a weird situation. His story kind of unrolled. I mean, it kind of just flowed out of him. He was actually from Northern Ireland, and he started, just wrote a few words on a bit of paper and then just pushed it away, and he said, oh, there's just so much, I don't even know where to start. And then I sat down next to him and just started writing. And his story, we sat there for the whole afternoon. I was kind of listening, and the story kind of, when I think of it in my mind, once I saw a tree growing through a ruined building, so that the bricks are actually coming out of the branches, and it was quite weird looking, but that's kind of how I see it in my mind when I think of the experience that we had. It was almost like his story grew through me and became a part of me, and it was a really odd, profound experience that I still haven't shed really. How do I turn it over? Okay, why can't? Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm just going to show you this photograph. So the reason why this whole project lent itself so well to becoming a visual project and didn't just end up becoming a book full of words is because we were there to make digital stories. And so the whole time we were working with their stories, we were asking them, can you think of an image that would illustrate this, or that somehow can show people what this felt like? So the whole time we were talking to them and we were working with them, they were coming there with images. And then they called him by name. But prisoner 6, I'd be like, okay, so have you got an image? What sort of image would that look like? And he was sort of describing what Northern Ireland was like for him growing up as a kid. And he was talking about they were banging, he said biscuit lids. That's just a Freudian slip. So obviously I want a biscuit. Dustbin lids. They used to bang dustbin lids on the ground, and the noise. He was kind of describing what this sounded like. He was saying, oh, you can go on YouTube and you can find these pictures and you can do this and you can find that. And he was kind of describing it all to me so visually. And when I actually came back in, I ended up writing the whole story out sort of from his notes, because he was just talking in the end. And I found this picture and I showed it to him, and he was really struck by this, because he said that is me. I've got no idea if it really was, but I'm not sure which of the children in this picture that he thought was him, but he was absolutely sure that one of these children in the picture was him. I like to think it's the little boy who's looking straight at the camera, but it might not have been. It might have been one of the others. So this story was kind of growing inside me. I'm sorry, I'm waffling. I'm going to have to go back to Wallis in a minute, but just to show you a couple more slides. So one of the things that came through really strongly in his story was these really weird heroic archetypes. His stories were so symbolic, and the images that he used were so powerful. And he said something. He was telling me about how he'd run across a mountain range, the Mourne Mountains in Northern Ireland. As he told me it, I actually saw giants walking across the mountains. I saw a vision in my head, and I said, "Oh my God! When you said that, I just saw these giants walking across the mountains." And he just sort of sat back and he said that is that's Finn McCool, the giant. That is like a myth in Northern Ireland, which totally blew me away. I was like, oh my God, we're tapping into these massive archetypes. But that was another part of the process, is these sort of weird sort of mythical archetypes kept popping up. Beowulf became a theme of the project. There's a backstory behind that. It basically was somebody said bear waffle, and Wallis misheard it as being Beowulf, which I thought was hilarious. But again, this sort of heroic mythic narrative was kind of pullulating in the background of all these men's stories, and they were kind of heroic, but also there's a theme in the Beowulf, but it's about the hero, and it's also about the outcast, Grendel, the monster who's sort of shunned. And there was this sort of dichotomy between the men, that they were sort of heroic in one sense. There was something really noble and pure about them, but they were also shunned. They were also the outcasts. So that was another element. Sorry, I think I'm talking way too much. Anyway, so somewhere in the middle of 2017, and we did this project in 2017, I had this load of notes, and my first way of trying to process some of this experience was to narrate Prisoner 6's story and try and turn it into a film using the images that we discussed together. And when I got to the end of narrating it and turning it into a little film, I realized I took off my glasses, and these were my glasses, and they only had one arm. And that had recently just happened. I just recently snapped my glasses. And I realized that was him, because he had sat there that whole afternoon with one-armed glasses, sort of balancing them. And that was part of our experience that afternoon. It was almost like I was channeling him. But I'm going to go on to Wallis now. So basically we had all these notes, all this material. Where are we going to go from here? That's it. Wallis.
Okay. So we had obviously Prisoner 6 in the book. So then we had to, both in terms of time and editorially, select who else's stories were going to be developed comic style, that was going to illustrate, and which ones were going to be shown as words. So Prisoner 1 on this slide here, he'd not actually written he didn't actually write out a script particularly. He just sat and spoke for a while one day that we happened to record, and it was very poetic, and he spoke about himself in he described himself in very paradoxical language, and he talked about being from over a bridge, and this bridge was a real bridge that he was talking about, but it was also a metaphorical bridge, and it was a bridge that occurred in his dreams quite a lot as well. So just a couple of, from his words here, he says, "I'm a closed book, but I can be quite open. I'm from just over the bridge, so close but so far." And then over here he's saying, "I believe there's a cosmic battle between good and evil." And for a while we were going to have him almost as like a human spirit guide character that would welcome the reader into the book and welcome the new prisoners that would join him. That didn't quite come to pass actually in the final edit, but that was kind of with me as I was visualizing some of the other stories. So I'm going to the next slide, please. So Prisoner 2 here is being welcomed by Prisoner 1 up on the bridge there, and Prisoner 2 is a youngster, and he'd written he'd made two films. One was an amazing, very heartfelt description of what it is to come from disadvantage and see everybody else having opportunities that you just cannot have because of where you happen to be born to. And another one was his describing what it's like, his first night in prison. This was his first sentence. He was quite new to it all. So it very much felt like through the description of this story, he was, if you haven't been to prison yourself and you're the reader, it's very much like he's bringing the reader from where the reader is to where he is. And so there was this sense of diving into the underworld through his eyes. And we can go on to the next slide, please. And how this describes the sense of him losing his identity. So he said, the words on here might be these words. "The building I've entered I'm not comfortable with. although I'm comfortable in my black suit that I've been wearing since being sentenced just a few hours ago. So already then we're getting a sense of how quickly something like this happens. You're in your own clothes and you're sentenced, and then you're in the prison. I noticed a black bin with items of clothing inside. I realised that that is what I'm about to be given to wear. Tracksuit bottoms, t-shirt and jumper, all oversized. This was the point in putting them on. I realised that I'm a number in this establishment. Okay, so have the next slide, please. And prisoner 9, his was a love story, so we really wanted to include him. He was desperate for his film to be going out into the real world, so hopefully his girlfriend will find it and see, learn of his feelings for her. And also when we were making the films together, he asked me to do the drawings for his film as well. So these aren't the drawings that I did for his film, because they all got destroyed, but it was nice to have had that kind of working with him visually in the making of the films as well. And he was a very good director. He was very specific, and he wanted me to make him really good looking, and actually he was really good looking. And what else was it about him? Oh, that's right, yeah, so I've said that bit. So the next slide, please. Oh, so that's his girlfriend that will never see the film. Hopefully maybe she'll see the book. And then finally we had prisoners 4 and 5. These were a couple of middle-aged, middle-class men that had been very successful all their lives, and they were doing some kind of green technology project that was going pretty well, but they were doing something unlawful as that happened, and so they found themselves in prison. And they did their crime together, but they actually shared a cell together. So it was really interesting to depict that, and I could really feel into it as well, because they're incredibly emotional about this whole experience. One of them was emotional all the time. He cried at no matter what we were talking about, it would make him cry. So he was very much in a sort of PTSD, I think, time, just constantly. The other one himself had already adopted kids from broken homes, and most of the other prisoners he was sitting with had also come from quite broken homes. So there was quite a lot of reflecting going on back and forth and coming through in their work, and obviously in their stories. And what they had said was, one of them, there's quotes on here that aren't on this version of the slideshow, but one was saying about green project. I can't remember, but what the other one was talking about, he said defecating in the same room as a cellmate demands an apology every time, which I think again is also just really bangs home the situation of these people that we were working with. So I think that's all for this section. So one more slide, see if it's mine or yours. Oh, end of waffle is waffle too. So now it's yours.
Okay, so apart from the men and some of the staff who feature in what ultimately became the book, there was also the prison itself, which kind of almost became an entity in its own right. It is an absolutely bonkers building. Now, it is the first prison I ever went into. I've been in other cities. It's the only Victorian prison I've been in. I've been in the more modern, which are very utilitarian prisons. They're just kind of like blocks. So this is this weird arcane building. And obviously the name of the book, Wings, I'm not quite sure, I can't quite remember when the name Wings came to me, but it just suddenly was like, boom, it was there. And that maybe, it might have been just later, or maybe the end of 2017. But a lot of the time, if you go into a prison and you're kind of delivering an education project or something like that, you'll kind of be working in the education block, or this kind of nice little sanitized space. And for us, for some reason, I still don't really understand why, it's really kind of weird looking back on it, how it was. We were on the wings a lot of the time, and that's a space that usually you don't really, as a visitor, you don't really see. And since then, I've actually worked in a prison full-time, in a women's prison, which I did not enjoy at all. So I've been on wings quite a bit. But for an outsider to come in, it's quite very rare for them to be on the wings. And this kind of was a constant theme of every conversation that we had with people. It's like, oh, you have to go onto the wings. Oh, you have to live on the wings. Oh, have you been onto the wings? Well, you'll be on the wings. And this the wings was every other word that people were saying. So that kind of came fixed in my head, this idea of the wings. And actually being on the wings was quite insane. This is, we obviously didn't take this picture inside. This is a picture I got from a book. But this is the inside of Wandsworth Prison. It's built in 1851. When I got into so the wings kind of go off from this central atrium, and it's everything there. I realised me and Wallis were kind of wandering around, and we'd get taken around because we had to get shepherded around everywhere. So we'd be shepherded around by various members of staff, and sometimes we'd end up having to wait in this little atrium while some prisoners were collected or something was happening. And this is to this bonkers space, and I was kind of looking around. This whole thing is premised on a hexagon. So you've got this six-pointed star in the middle. And what you can kind of maybe see a little bit is these brass grills, which are like honeycombs, and you can see through them. So you're standing on it, you can see through these little hexagonal honeycombs to the floor. Through to the floor below, and also up to the roof, this sort of glass-filled panopticon roof up above you. Absolutely bonkers space. And I was standing in there while we were hovering around waiting for whatever was happening one day, and I just thought, this is like, it's meant to be like a beehive, and all these cells are like sort of honeycomb, like beehive cells. And so again, with wings, so not only have you got the prison wings as in it being part of the architecture, there was also this theme of bee wings, because then, another weird synchronicity, these actual beehives appeared in the prison yard, which was like, oh my God, there's actual beehives started appearing, and there was a beekeeping project started happening while we were there. So there were actual bees flying around. What I realised quite a lot later, after we'd left the prison, is that there was quite a lot of Masonic symbolism inside in the prison architecture. And so bees, I realized very late on, after doing a bit of research, and beehives are part of Masonic symbolism. And it's kind of all about, oh, we all work together for the common good, it's industry, this, that, and the other. Also, we've got the six-pointed star, and the spiral staircases. So I don't know if you can remember from the previous screen where you can see these spiral staircases going up from that central atrium. And it's all kind of about moving upwards in your life and progressing to a better, I don't know, whatever goes on in Masonland, I don't really understand. And the other thing that was happening during this time while I was doing this research was I became really kind of fixated on Victorian prison architecture, which I realised was there was a real focus on creating prisons based on hexagons or other polygon shapes. And this is a workhouse. This big hexagon is a workhouse, Abingdon workhouse, I think. And then we've got Millbank Prison, which is like a giant snowflake that actually was replaced. Actually, Tate Britain is on that spot now, which is kind of weird. And so Wallis and I were kind of feeding backwards and forwards with these images and these ideas and the bees and the hexagons, and this started to feed into this visual language that then was starting to take place. So I'll go over to Wallis now.
Okay, thank you. So we haven't got very long, so I'm just going to flip through this bit quickly. So I'm taking aboard so obviously I had quite a lot of visual material to play with the architecture of the building being a strong part of the story, as well as the men's stories themselves. So one of the first things I did was to find the panopticon shape and arrange it into panels for prisoner one's story about his disorientation about being in the prison. And I also I made a decision not to show any of their faces because of one of the themes of, anonymity and being deleted in the stories. And have the next slide, please.
Oops, sorry. Is that the right one?
No, next one. So the two faces. So yeah, that's it. Until I changed my mind, I thought, no, I do want faces. I want to do mug shots, but I'll obscure them somehow according to the themes of their own particular stories. So prisoner 2 going into the underworld, here he has been kind of like watery, and I'd start to become very pencily and wanting to find lights and darks in the pressure of the pencil as opposed to linear as I'd first started. And then I got into kind of playing around digitally as well. If you look on the right hand side, there's like a crisscross shape on the forehead. And if you go to the next slide, and the next one down, this is I've edited this since, so it's the old one. Next one down, sorry. So it's the trellis there on the on the prison building. So I really wanted to kind of to bring the imagery of the interior and the exterior of the people as well as the buildings. There's also some wing shapes going on there in that building as well, as you can see, and this idea of light coming from above, because as Victoria explained, there was this sense of like an upward spiral transformation, almost portal-like imagery that we were kind of seeing in the prison, and also witnessing in the prisoners themselves, this kind of sense of transformation that was occurring, not just because we're with them, but that often can happen in prison. I've seen it happen lots of times. If we can go up to where it's kind of this image but grey, that's it. So the other one.
Oh, sorry.
So that there was the drawing of the exterior of the prison, and I played around with it digitally again, and this is that drawing, but you can see there's almost like a winged figure in the middle, and it's also a bit of a devilish face going on, and that is the walls that are used for the interiors of prisoners 4 and 5 story. So if we go to the next slide down. Maybe up then, this one, yeah. So you see it in the background there in the middle panel, that's their walls, and then also you've got the theme of the light coming down on across all of these stories, and some kind of wing-like representation, and it could be angelic or devilish, however you wish to see it. And also, so now we're really kind of getting into the building blocks of the visual language that kind of start to come through with the conversations we're having, as well as the recollections that we had of the experience there and the stories from the men. And you've got the panel on the far left there, you've got prisoner 2 with this kind of hexagonal skeletal framework going on as well, which kind of, it's also a bit like snowflakes and him being in prison for the first time. So all of this, I had quite a lot of visual stuff to work with that permeated throughout the whole of the all of the stories, simply because I kind of find it, even if you don't notice it consciously, if you repeat motifs, it kind of creates a density in the work, and it allows the audience to feel that they are in an actual world. If you go down to I think the last slide now, or was it? So this hive at the very start, this kind of hexagonal hive, yeah, basically the texture there using that one, and that very texture and that hive is used in that far left drawing. And I think there's actually one more slide. Go to that one, last one. Using so the hexagon also is a flattened cube, and the cube obviously is very resonant to being in prisons, like something you're trapped inside of. And I also utilised there's the famous optical illusion, the Necker cube, where you can see it from different angles, or if you look at it for a certain amount of time, it changes. So again, it's this sense of transformation and things changing in terms of how you're looking at them. Again, being sort of very prevalent to the themes of the project and working in prisons, full stop. So I utilised that, the Necker cube optical illusion with the hexagons and the cubes to create this kind of disorientating feel for prisoner 6's story. I want to say their names, it's so hard not saying their names. And also the like the snowflake and the skeletal. So you can just sort of see how lots of patterns, textures and shapes really guided me through doing the drawings, which was just a joy to have, actually.